Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I've put together a collection of 5 French country spring thrift flips. For my project today, I'm going to be using this wood blank that I got online. I will be sure to link it below. And I'm going to be first creating some texture. So I'm grabbing some of Dixie Belle's Sea Spray texture additive, and I'm going to be adding it to chocolate chalk mineral paint. So I'm going to pour out a little bit of my paint, and then I'm going to scoop out some sea spray a little bit at a time and mix it well. I'm then going to apply the mixture using a chip brush, and I'm just adding it to the center part of my board. So I want to create some texture here. This wood is smooth and very new looking. I want it to look like old barn wood maybe that has been painted over the years and has all that wonderful texture. The chip brush is also going to help with this. Often I will dab and stipple this product on, but for today I am just brushing it on. The mixture is thick enough that I am creating lines and imperfections, which is exactly what we want because this is the layer that's going underneath our paint. When my base coat is dry, I'm going to use Dixie Belle's Buttercream chalk mineral paint and my size 12 Eco brush, and I am going to start adding my paint. Now I'm letting those bristles skip over a lot of that texture, and I don't mind if the coverage isn't even. In fact, we do want that chocolate to show underneath. We are going for a layered, painted, almost old barnwood look. To create even more texture, I did use my hairdryer to speed up that drying process to create some cracks and some raised detail. I also took some 220 grit sandpaper and sanded back some of the buttercream, pulled back through some of that chocolate texture that we created. Next, I'm going to be using Redesign's Stripes stamp. I'm so excited, guys. I am now a Redesign stockist, and I'm so happy to be carrying this awesome line. This even comes with a grid sheet there so you can line things up. Now, the reason this stamp really spoke to me is because of this green sack stripe design. So I'm going to pull off the plastic that comes with it. And the beauty of these stamps are that the image actually stays on one side of the stamp, so you can see exactly what it's going to look like without needing the plastic backing. I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Silk Morning Sunrise paint. I'm going to pour a little bit of that out on some cardboard, and I'm using my brayer, and then I'm going to start adding that paint to my Redesign Stripes stamp. Now, when you're using paint, you do want to use a little bit more paint than you would in other cases. You definitely want to use more than you would if you were just using ink. I'm then going to position my stamp in the center, and when I'm happy with the position, I'm going to press down. Now, I don't need this to be perfect. In fact, I want this to look worn and vintage looking, so I don't need a perfect look here. So you can see I'm applying pressure and then lifting straight up. I'm then going to add some more paint to my stamp, line it up so that we can have that stripe continuing down the center of our design. When my paint is dry, I'm going to take IOD's Queen Bee stamp, and I want to use the laurels that we have there to add to my design. So I'm just working out here how I'm going to have to position it. I'm then inking up my design with IOD's permanent black ink, and then cleaning up any excess ink with a wet wipe, and then positioning it on the left-hand side first. So I'm positioning it in a way that I can continue the pattern a bit further on up the top, because I do need this design to be a bit larger than it appears as is. So I'm inking up the design again, but not all the way. So you can see I'm wiping off the excess, and then I'm going to position it just above the previous image that we stamped to continue that laurel design. I'll be repeating the same process on the right hand side, and it doesn't matter if this doesn't turn out perfect because we are building a background image here. Next, I'm going to be taking an element from IOD's Antiquities Stamp. I'm going to ink that up with permanent black ink, and then I'm going to position it in the left-hand corner there. Next, I'm going to take this script stamp that I found online and I'm going to ink up part of that design, and I'm going to be adding it to the bottom section of our wall art there. So I'm just going to be applying that first section first, and once I am happy with that impression, I'm going to ink up another section of the stamp and place it next to it just so it looks like a continuation of that text. I then added a little bit more ink and just sort of randomly pressed the text down so it looks like a fractured image. I then grabbed this little postage stamp design and I'm going to just add that to the top left there, just layering it over the top of the IOD image. I'm then going to spell out the word lavender in French. I'm using IOD's typesetting stamp here, and I'm using a thin mount. I'm using those grid lines to help me line up the text and make sure that it's straight. You can see I'm just repositioning my letter stamps there just to try and get it as straight as possible. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take some more of my permanent black ink, line it up on the top section there, and you can see that I have left a gap where the other letter A needs to go. So you can see I'm just applying pressure and then I'm going to lift it straight up. Then I'm going to grab that letter A and add that to the center to finish off our word. When the ink was dry, I took some of Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin and I'm going to seal my entire design. When that's dry, I'm going to use Redesign's Lavender Harvest Mould. I have been wanting to use this design for so long. I have it in stock as well for you guys if you want to try it. And I'm dusting the design first with some cornstarch, and then I'm going to use some of my Das air dry clay. I'm rolling it into a sausage sort of a shape, and then I'm going to start pressing my clay into the design. So with using these ones, I found that sort of pushing my clay off to the side helped a lot to get a cleaner impression, and also just being a little bit gentler. So I'm going to continue working that clay out of the mold, then I'm going to flex it, and this time I did flip it over and I used gravity to help me get my design out. I was very impressed with the quality of the details in these molds. So I'm going to start positioning the castings on my board there just to work out how much of this I'm going to have to cast, and I'm going to continue casting this lovely design until I'm happy with how it looks. Once I'm finished casting my lavender, I'm going to cast the sweet little bees that are in this mold. I'm then also going to cast the larger bow design from this mold here. I feel like that's a lovely touch down the bottom of this little lavender bunch. Now that I have all of my castings ready, I can start gluing everything down. I'm using my Sealy's Quick Set wood glue. Any wood glue will do really. And you can see I'm using a palette knife to help me lift up the different castings. They were a little bit delicate in certain sections, so this just really helped me make sure that I didn't pull them too hard or cause them to break. After I had all of my castings glued down, I allowed these to dry overnight. The next day, I came in with Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1. I'm applying it to the center part of my wall art there, and I'm applying it in a sort of cross-hatch sort of motion. If you apply it in this random way, you're going to get more authentic looking crackle. I let that dry, and once it was tacky to the touch, I came in with Crackle Step 2 and repeated the same motions as before, applying that over the top of Step 1. I then let that dry for several hours. Next, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Amethyst Chalk Mineral Paint. I'm applying it with a small artist brush, and it doesn't matter too much if I go in the other areas because obviously we have sealed that. We've also got the crackle down, so I'll be able to wipe up any errors that I make. Obviously in real life, lavender has a lot of different purple tones, so I'm going to take some of Dixie Belle's Buttercream Chalk Mineral Paint and I'm going to be mixing it with the Amethyst Chalk Mineral Paint to create a lighter purple. So I'm going to stir that really well, and then once I'm happy with the color, I'm going to start adding it to our lavender flowers there. You can see I'm just hitting the high points at this stage. Once that lighter purple layer was dry, I came back in with the amethyst and added that back over the top to just sort of blend those two tones together, make it look a little bit more realistic. When that was dry, I used Paint Couture's Evergreen Chalk Paint, and I'm going to be using this on the stems of the lavender. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am now a Redesign with Prima retailer. I am adding products as they arrive from the US. So if you are in Australia and you would like to try the Redesign products, make sure you check out my website. I am also so excited to be doing the Easter 2024 release soon, so keep your eye out for pre-orders. To add some realism and create some tonal contrast, I then took Paint Couture's Basil Chalk Paint and I'm going to layer that over the top of the evergreen paint that we have added to the stems. I also then went in and added a few little dots of that Basil Chalk Paint in amongst the petals, in amongst the purple tones. Again, when you look at lavender, it's usually not all just one color or all just purple. You're going to see other little seeds and things through there. So this is going to add to that realism. When that was dry, I took my buttercream brush that we used at the beginning, wiped off the excess, and now I'm going to do some dry brushing over the top of our lavender. And I love how this is bringing out all of those details. When that was dry, I took Paint Couture's Light Brown Sugar Antiquing Glaze and my Paint Couture brush, and I am going to go over the top of the center part of our artwork. I'm first obviously focusing on the areas where we added that crackle, and then I'm using a wet wipe to wipe back the excess. I want the overall tone of the center section to be antiqued, but obviously I don't want it to be too dark. So we're letting it build up in certain areas, wiping it back in others. You can really see that crackle starting to show through as well. I'm also going to work that glaze into the sections where we have our beautiful lavender. I really like the sort of halo effect that you get when you add those into the details, and I'm going to make sure that I also go over the top of the lavender itself. This is going to add to that tonal variation that we always talk about that gives your project depth. So I'm going to work it into the center section there with the lavender, and then I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe back the excess. In certain areas, I also took my mister and I used that to help water that glaze down a little bit in the center, especially in the areas where I had trouble getting that wet wipe. So I'm going to continue to add that glaze until the entire center section has that antiqued look. Next, I'm going to use Paint Couture's French Gold Metallic Paint, and I'm going to be adding it to the bow. So this is a very rich, heavy metal metallic paint, so it has a lot more pigments than just the Luxe Metallics, and I'm adding it to that beautiful bow. I love this gold. It's not really bright, it's not really dark. It definitely is, just like it says, it's a French gold. It is so beautiful. And remember, with the metallics, obviously as they dry, they do get brighter. I'm also adding that same beautiful French gold to our little bees. When the gold's dry, I'm taking Paint Couture's Pitch Black chalk paint and I'm going to paint on some little stripes on our bees, and I'm also going over the top of some of the details to bring the bees a bit more to the forefront so they don't blend into the back as much. If I've inspired you to try any of the Paint Couture products I've used today, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. For the frame of our artwork, I'm going to be taking Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown glaze and I'm going to be adding that around the entire outside. I love the darker tone of this contrasted with the lighter brown that we have in the center, and this definitely gives a French country feel. I didn't want to go too far with this. I thought about adding molds around the frame, but I really wanted the art in the center to be the star of this project as opposed to going over the top with the frame. So we're just adding this glaze and I think it's going to frame it nicely. So I'm adding it with a brush and then I'm using a paper towel to wipe back the excess. If you don't have access to this glaze, you could create a brown paint wash with a brown water-based paint to stain your frame, or you could just use a traditional stain from the hardware store. When that was dry, I took my buttercream brush again and I'm doing some more dry brushing over the top of our little bees and our lavender just to make them pop again, bring out those details again. And here's our finished French country artwork. I had so much fun using the new products that I have from Redesign. That lavender mold is absolutely gorgeous and it pairs beautifully with the stripes stamp. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. I found this set of bookends at the thrift store. I thought that they were a little bit quirky, not quite my style, but they definitely had great bones, definitely something that I could give a makeover more to my style. But first I had to remove the little cat sitting on top of the book, so I sort of just used a hammer and a screwdriver, sort of like a chisel, and then I used the end of my hammer to pry that cat off, and I did the same thing with the sun. To replace the cats, I'm going to be using these little ceramic birds. They are something that I carry in my shop and I felt like the scale was perfect, and these are perfect for Easter and spring decoration. To prime these birds, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white, and I'm applying it to each of the birds with a sponge, and I'll be doing 2 coats. While my birds are drying, I'm going to focus on the books themselves, and I'm going to give the area where the cat used to sit a bit of a sand to try and make it as even as possible. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's embossing medium, and using a palette knife, I'm going to lay down a thin layer to try and even out the surface. You could definitely use some sort of spackle filler for this step. I picked this because I had it on hand, and also it tends to dry a little bit quicker than filler would. When the embossing medium is dry, I'm going to take that 2-in-1 primer again, and I am going to coat the entire book, both the left and right bookends, with this primer. This is going to seal in and ensure that I won't get any bleed through, and it will also make sure that my paint sticks well. Remember, you can find a full product list in the description below, and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. When the primer is dry, I'm going to use a combination of Gorilla Super Glue and hot glue on the base of each of my birds to attach it to the book stacks. Next, I'm going to be using IOD's Primitive Mould. I'm going to be dusting certain designs with cornstarch, and then I'm going to work my dust air dry clay into those designs. I'm going to be making quite a few of these, repeating a lot of these designs. Basically, I want it to look like my birds are sitting on a bed or a nest of flowers and leaves. So I definitely had to create quite a few of these castings. Don't worry, I didn't make you sit through me doing them all. So you're just going to see me make one of each of the designs that I'm going to be using. So I've made a lot of those leaf designs. Now I'm going to make a couple of those flowers, and I also took IOD's Village Market mold and I'm just working it into the florals in that design. I'm then working some clay into these smaller flower designs that I found online. I'll be sure to link them. I always think it's a good idea to have a bit of variation in size when you're putting together your molds. I also used this sort of medium size mold here. This has a lot of different style flowers, so I did cast quite a few different designs again to have that variety. I'm also going to be casting a few of the leaf designs from this mold. There is a smaller design and a larger design. And then I'm going to use my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to start attaching my casting. So at this point, I'm just adding that Village Market mold around the base of the bird. And once that's secure, I'm then going to start adding some of the greenery from the Primitive mold. And you can see I'm sort of draping that greenery over the book, so it's sort of spilling over the edge. I'm also layering in some of those leaves that we cast as well. So you can see that I'm gluing down a lot of the leaf designs first, and then I'll be coming in with the florals that we cast before. So just layering those flowers, and I'm also sort of folding and bending and manipulating those flowers so it looks like the bird is sitting on them. I just wanted to give this a little bit of a lifelike appearance, make it look a little bit more natural, like maybe the bird had collected the florals and made a nest for themselves. If you're going to try this, obviously it will be up to you as to how many flowers you add. I just really wanted to give you an idea of how I laid out my different designs. I also put this larger leaf design in the back section from the Primitive mold, and I also added the smaller flowers from that mold as well. Next, I did cast a couple of these little berries. I tried to do a few different sizes and I just sort of scattered them about. I did definitely have to condense this video. It would have been quite a long one if I didn't condense it. Hopefully you'll be able to tell from the photos at the end how it all came together, and I did do a very similar design on the other bookend. After laying out all of my florals and greenery, I decided to cast the larger bow from this design, and I just felt like this sort of really tied everything together and it gave it a bit more of a French sort of shabby chic look. So I've cast that one and I'm going to add some glue to the back and then position it hanging off the edge. I also wanted it to look like some of the greenery had fallen over the edge, so I've taken this leaf and I'm actually bending this design and manipulating it a little bit to make it look like it's fallen and sort of maybe started to dry a little bit in the corner there. And I also added a couple of leaves and some flowers. So I'm just experimenting with how I can bend and sort of manipulate these castings to a point. On the other bookend design, you can see I also added a sort of curled up little leaf design on the edge there, and a couple of other leaves and also some florals. I definitely just had a bit of a play. I wanted it to definitely feel a little bit more natural, like things had fallen down off the top. I let my castings dry overnight, and the next day this is what we have so far. You can see the bird is sitting on a bed of florals and greenery. They are pretty similar in design. Obviously the position of each of the florals and greenery are not going to be exactly the same. I'm then coming in with Paint Couture's Peace Mineral Paint. I'm going to go over just the book sections. It doesn't matter if I go a little bit over the greenery and florals that we added, because obviously I am going to be going over the top of those with some colors, but I just really wanted to get this base down first, and it's going to take 2 coats of this color to get the coverage that I want. So I'm making sure that I'm not going too much over the sections where the book pages are, but I do want the sort of border of the book, the book covers I should say, I obviously want to have some of that tone on those sections. Once my 2 coats of paint were dry, I took Paint Couture's Basil chalk paint. I'm taking a little bit out of the container, putting it onto a palette, and then I'm also going to take Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen chalk paint, and I just want to lighten up that paint. I want a couple of different tones of green to work with. So I'm going to take the lighter color green, and I'm going to go over the top of the flat leaves that we added and add that lighter green tone. On the other greenery that we added, I did take the lid of the basil chalk paint and I decided to come in with that tone again, just to create some variety and contrast. Obviously leaves in real life are not going to all be the same green tone, so I'm just going to work my way around my molds, adding those different tones of green. And obviously whatever I do on this bookend, I am going to repeat on the other side. Once all my greenery was painted, I took Paint Couture's Rose Gold Luxe Metallic Paint, and I am going to focus on the little rose castings that I added. You can see I'm working that paint into the design, and then once I'm happy with the coverage of the rose gold, I did then come in with Paint Couture's Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic Paint just to add a little bit of tonal variation. Obviously it's going to lighten up certain areas. After adding the same color combination on each of the rose designs, I took Paint Couture's Ballet Slipper Luxe Metallic Paint and I'm adding it to the other florals there with the larger petals. This is such a beautiful baby pink. It is so shiny, just definitely one of my new favorites to be using for Easter and spring crafts, and definitely Valentine's Day too. Next, I'm going to take some of Paint Couture's Queen's Court Mineral Paint and I'm going to put a little bit of that out on my palette, and also adding some of the Oyster Pearl Metallic Paint to give this a little bit of a subtle shine. And I'm just going to work that into the designs there from the primitive mold. And again, I wanted to add some of the metallics to my design, as I love the hint of shine that it gives. So even though I'm going to be layering other products over the top, you're still going to be able to see that lovely shine. It just definitely gives your project a little bit of something special. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around, and I'm adding that Queen's Court to the other florals that I have on my bookends, also including those little smaller florals that I added. I'm also adding it to the little berries that we glued down. Once my paint is completely dry, I'm going to take some of that farmhouse linen. I'm pulling off the excess, and now I'm doing some dry brushing over the top of the paint that we've just put down. I want this to have an aged, faded, sort of dusty look to it, so I'm just going to work my way around adding that dry brushing to my florals and greenery. We're also going to be laying that same paint down over the top of the book itself, but for now I'm just adding that until I'm happy with the look of it. It did take a couple of coats before I was happy with how it looked. For the actual book sections, I did go in a little bit heavier with that paint. Ultimately, I want the piece paint that we added first to be an undertone. I want that to help give the appearance of age, so we're really going in and layering those colors over the top of it. So I'm going to keep working that paint into those details. You can see it's skipping over some of the texture. Again, this is going to add to the age, and it did actually end up taking 2 coats for me to be happy with the way that it looked. I'm also adding 2 coats of the same farmhouse linen white paint to our little bird. You can see here on the second coat over the books, it really starts to all tie together. The tones start to work nicely. I definitely still feel that that piece tone underneath was necessary. It just adds to that aged, layered look. Next, I'm coming in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm just adding a little bit to the center of each of the flowers. And after I've added it, I do use a wet wipe and also sometimes just my finger just to tone that down a little bit and bring a little bit of that white back underneath. Again, it just makes it look a little bit more realistic when you have that tonal variation. When the glaze was dry, I took Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin top coat, and I am going to seal the entire project except for our bird. If I've inspired you to try any of these Paint Couture products, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. You will find the link in the description and I will put it on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once my top coat is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1 and I'm going to be applying it to the bird. I'm applying it in a dabbing motion. I'm building up that product. I'm adding it in this way so that I get more authentic looking crackle as opposed to just brushing it on. Sometimes you can get the alligator crackle, which doesn't look as great. I'm also adding a little bit to the book themselves in a few random areas. Once step 1 is dry and sticky to the touch, I'm coming in with step 2 and applying it in the same dabbing motion. I'm being careful though not to be too rough so that I don't disturb that step 1. When I'm finished applying it back over the same sections that I applied it in step 1, I'm going to let this crackle medium dry for several hours. Next, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze and I'm going to add it over my bird first, and you can see that as soon as I start adding this, you can see the beautiful crackle that we've managed to achieve. I'm going to work in sections and then I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe back some of the excess so that it stays mainly in the cracks. Obviously, I do want a bit of a vintage look for this project, so I am still going to allow it to tone my paint and give my paint an antique look, but we do want it darker in those cracks. Once I'm finished adding the glaze and wiping it away from the bird, I'm going to move my attention to the book itself. You can see that I'm adding it to the section of the book there where I've added some crackle. I'm applying it and then wiping it away. I'm also going to work that glaze into the sections where the book pages are. I feel like this definitely helps it look like old worn book pages, so I'm not going to wipe back as much from those sections, and I'm also adding it obviously to the rest of the book sections. As I said, I'm definitely going for a vintage sort of French shabby look here, but if this was a little bit too much for you, it was a bit too grungy, you could obviously leave the glazing step out, just do it maybe on the bird and then leave it at that. But I definitely love how this is completely transforming this piece. It's making it look old world. It's definitely one of my favorite looks. I'm also going to be working that glaze into the flowers. I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe it back, and at times I am also going to be using my mister to water down that glaze. I want these to almost look like dried flowers in some ways, so the glaze is definitely going to help with that effect. If you don't have access to this particular product, you could create a brown paint wash with some brown water-based paint, or you could use a brown wax or a black wax. It just depends on what look you're after and what products you have. Once my glaze is completely dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic and I'm going to apply it with a small artist brush to the little bow that we added before. I don't mind if I don't get full coverage here, it will just add to that weathered look. After applying it to the bow, I'm going to be applying a little bit of it to the center of each of our flowers, just a subtle hint of that beautiful bronze. I'm then also going to add the bronze to the pages of the books. I always love those books that have the gold gilding on the edges. And then I'm also adding it to the indented sections. I think these were carved into these little wooden pieces. I'm just going to add those as well. I also then added some of that bronze to our little bird's beak. Now obviously I'm going to be repeating the same steps on our other bookend. Next I'm going to add that Ballet Slipper Luxe Metallic paint. I've just got a little bit on my finger and I'm going to run it just over the edge of our pink flowers just to bring back a little bit more of that metallic. Finally, I'm also going to take some of the Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic paint. I have a little bit on my finger and I'm just going to go over the top of some of the leaves. And here are our finished spring bird bookends. I'm so happy with how these turned out. I feel like now they're definitely a little bit French, a little bit shabby chic, definitely better than they were with the cats on it. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. project, I'm going to be using this 40cm diameter wood blank that I got from a craft website. It also has a round frame around the outside. I'm going to need something to attach my wreath and the other bits and pieces to, so I'm going to drill some holes into the frame that runs around the outside of the wood blank. I'm just going to drill that through. I'm going to be doing 4 different holes for this. Next, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Cozy Beige Chalk Paint. I'm going to be adding 1 coat to the center of my wood blank. So basically my vision for this is that I will have a design in the center. You could do stamping, you could do stenciling. We are going to be doing an IOD transfer, and I wanted to keep the center part quite neutral because there's a lot of other colors and elements that are going to be added to this piece. I don't want the center to be overwhelming, so I'm going to add 1 coat of this paint and then let it dry. And then I'm going to be using IOD's Ephemeral Melange transfer. This is an 8-page transfer. If you haven't seen this one before, there are so many beautiful florals, vintage style advertisements. There's also some vintage style labels, seed packets. There's so many to choose from. This is definitely one of my favorites. This is the 2nd packet of this that I have opened, so I've definitely enjoyed using it. I'm going to be using this Maze Roses design here, and I'm going to be just working out in the center there just how much of the transfer I'm going to be using. I'm then going to curve the corners of the transfer so that it will sit flat over my surface. Cutting it this way is also going to make it a lot easier for me to add my transfer. Once I've done that, I'm going to peel the backing sheet off and then position it in the center. The grid lines definitely help with this. I'm then going to go over the top of the entire transfer with the plastic transfer tool that comes with the transfer. And at this point, I just want to make sure that the entire piece is stuck down. And then once I've done that, I will pick up a corner and I will start rubbing and lifting. You'll see I'm lifting and rubbing as I go. If I have any areas that have not released, I put the plastic back down and continue to rub. I just worked in sections, making sure that I didn't go too fast because I don't want to damage the image. And I just continued until I had that whole image down. Once I was finished, I did use the carrier sheet to further rub and burnish over the top of the design. I'm then going to take out IOD's Barnwood Planks stamp, and I'm going to be using IOD's permanent black ink. I'm just going to ink up one side of the stamp, position it on the right hand side there in that empty space, and I'm pressing down gently. I don't need a perfect image here. I want it to look like the design is on some wood planks. If I get ink where I don't want it, I'm just using a wet wipe to pull it back from the transfer. I added a bit more ink to my stamp, flipped it over, and now I'm adding it to the opposite side. I'm then going to maneuver that stamp around the inside section there, making sure that I'm not overlapping too much on my transfer. I don't really want the ink on my transfer, and just continuing to fill in that blank space so that it looks like it's on old wood planks. Once I filled in the blank areas, I did then take a wet wipe and I started to wipe back some of the ink. This is just going to give it more of a faded, more subdued look. I don't want it to be too overpowering. Obviously the transfer is the star of the show. I don't want that to be overshadowed by the Barnwood plank stamp, but I just do really love the texture and depth that this is given. To seal the center section, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin, and I'm just going to be applying one coat in the center. You'll see that I also add it around the outside inner sections. That's just to make sure that it is all sealed up and that I haven't missed any areas. Once my sealer was completely dry, I took out this grapevine wreath that I had in my stash, and I'm actually going to be pulling it apart. I'm first of all going to undo the florist wire that is wrapped around, holding the grapevine wreath different sections together. And I'm going to be using this wire, so that will definitely have a purpose, but I need to pull it apart first because obviously this is too small. I want that to go around the outside framed border section on the wood blank, so I need to pull it apart first. And I'm just going to continue to gently pull these apart. I don't want to break it, but I do need these apart so that I can reshape it and resize it. So I'm just going to keep pulling at this until I'm happy with how it looks. I actually have a couple of these, so I did end up pulling another one apart as well that we'll use a little bit from. And once I have that roughly the shape that I want, I can move on to the next step. Once I'm happy with how my wreath is looking, it's the size that I want it, I'm going to then be using some of that florist wire that we took off, and I'm threading it through the holes that we created at the start and then using that to secure the grapevine wreath in place. I'm going to be adding that at each of the 4 points. Once I'm finished securing the grapevine wreath into place, I'm going to be taking out these little terracotta pots that I had in my stash. I believe you can also get them from Amazon. I'm then going to be using the brush that I used with the Cozy Beige, and I'm going to offload that paint onto that napkin there, and then I'm going to start doing a little bit of dry brushing over the top of the terracotta pots. I want these to look a bit more weathered, almost maybe like there's some liming going on, and I'm just randomly adding that. Then I'm going to use a wet wipe to pull back some of that paint to fade it a little bit more. And then once I am happy with how that's looking, I'm going to be taking out Paint Couture's Vertigreen Glaze, and I'm going to add that in certain areas to simulate the look of moss. Ultimately, I'm going to be having a few different styles of pots, and this is one example of how I'm going to decorate it. Another thing that I'm going to be adding is Dixie Belle's Dixie Dirt. If you don't have this, you could use some shavings or dustings of black chalk pastels. That could also work as well. And I'm just going to be random about it. I don't want these to all look really uniform. I want them to look weathered and aged. And as I said, I'm going to have some of them look like this. I'm going to also have some of them that are untouched, and I'm also going to have some that are just the plain terracotta, but I'm going to add some of that Dixie Dirt to it to make it look like garden dirt. This particular little pot had a little chip out of it where I had dropped it accidentally previously, so I'm just going to add a little bit of dirt to that, drawing some attention to the imperfections. I'm also going to be using this greenery that I pulled off an IKEA garland, but we're going to put that to the side because first I need to start attaching these little pots. I'm going to be threading through some of that floral wire, and I'm going to cut off the length that I need, and then I'm going to be attaching the pot itself to the grapevine wreath. These are not heavy at all, so attaching it to the grapevine wreath will be more than enough to secure it in place. So I'm just threading that wire through and then twisting those little pieces together and tucking that underneath the wreath. Now obviously this wire is brown as well, so it will look pretty uniform. It's not going to stick out. I'm going to continue to add the little pots. You'll see I'm alternating between the whitewashed pots and the more terracotta pots that don't really have that much done to them. And you can also see that I'm changing the direction of them. I'm sort of putting one off to one way, and then for the next pot I'm putting it off the opposite way. So this was just something that I did to my taste, just as I was adding it, just however I wanted it to look. If you're going to do it, obviously you could use some larger pots. Perhaps you could even add in some variety when it comes to the size of the pots. It just depends on the look that you're after. You'll notice I've also put some little bird's nests there. I just have them sitting roughly where I want them to go. They are some that I got from a craft website. I thought that was a nice touch. To attach the bird's nest, because they're so light, I'm just going to add a dab of hot glue to the wreath itself, and then I'm pressing down the bird's nest until it's attached. Next, I'm going to start adding the little sprigs of greenery. Originally, I thought that I was going to have to hot glue them in place, but I found that I was actually able to just thread them through into the grapevine wreath, or in some cases even into the wire that I was using to attach the little terracotta pots. And as I'm positioning them, you'll see I'm also adjusting the greenery to work in and around the pots, and I just continued adding those until I was happy with how it looked. I kept it pretty simple and neutral by just adding this type of greenery. If you wanted to, you could definitely add a bit more color by perhaps adding some different flowers, some different feathers. I guess it just depends on what look you're trying to achieve with this wreath. As I mentioned previous, in the center, obviously I used the transfer and the stamps. If that wasn't to your taste, you could come in with a stencil. I saw one on Pinterest that I really liked that said potting shed, which I thought could also be really lovely. I just went with this design because I absolutely love the Ephemeral Melange transfer, and I felt like it was a simple but great addition to my piece. Once I was finished adding the greenery, I then moved on to adding some hot glue into each of the little pots. And then once I've added the hot glue, I'm going to take out some forest moss and put that into each of the pots. I do have this linked in my Amazon storefront. I just really liked this extra touch of making it look like they were little pots that were in the garden that had been collected and brought together. So I really like this touch. You could also probably use Spanish moss. That would also look lovely. Or like I said before, maybe you want to come in and add some florals to these. You could definitely go in a whole bunch of different directions if you were going to give this a try. As I was adding the forest moss, I noticed that quite a bit was accumulating down the bottom, so I decided to embrace it. I actually ended up adding some hot glue to the bottom, and now I'm just moving some of that excess moss and dust to the bottom section. I felt like it really tied in well with the piece. Next, I'm going to take out the front and back covers of the Ephemeral Melange transfer that I've already used up, and I'm actually going to be cutting out the designs on the back. I really like these little rose designs. They remind me of seed packets, so I'm going to be cutting out each of these. And of course, the front and back cover of IOD transfers are cardboard, so these are going to have a little bit more durability, so they're quite perfect for what I'm thinking of using them for. I also decided to cut out from the front cover this little seed packet style design. Next, I decided to add an uneven edge to the bottom of the little roses designs that we cut out, and to curve the upper corners just so that they would look a little bit more like the other seed packet design that I cut out from the front cover. As I said, I want these to look like old seed packets. So my next step was to take out Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze, and I'm going to go over the top of the white backgrounds on these rose designs. I feel like that will tie in a bit better with the other one that we cut out. I'm just brushing it on, and then I also went in and did some dabbing and stippling. I'm just doing one coat. This is going to give each of these the age that I want to achieve. When the glaze was dry, I took out my hole punch, and I'm going to put a hole at the top of each of our little seed packet designs. Next, I'm going to be attaching the larger seed packet design to the bottom section, and I'm actually going to be using some of the wire that's already there. I'm just pulling that through the hole and then twisting that in place to hold it. To attach these smaller seed packet designs, I'm going to be using just some simple twine. I'm threading that through the hole that I created, and then I'm actually going to tie this one to some of the wire that's already holding one of the little terracotta pots in place. I'm going to tie a double knot, and then once that's secured, I'm going to cut off the excess and as you'll see, I do tend to sort of move the greenery in the pots around to sit around it to make it look a bit more cohesive, like it's part of the design. And I'm repeating the same process for the other 2 seed packet designs. Next, I wanted to add in a little bit more movement, another little layer. So I took out a thinner piece of the grapevine wreath, and you'll see I'm just starting to thread that through over the top because I want some of this to be visible. I'll also have some of it sort of coming out the side and down the bottom. I felt like this gave it a bit more body, and as I said, to me it just felt like it gave the piece a bit more movement, and it really felt like it finished it off a bit. Today's project was inspired by a variety of images that I saw on Pinterest, and I just wanted to create a piece that not only had the wreath design, but it also had that lovely IOD element in the center. I feel like these different pieces go really well together. I can imagine this on a mantle, or I could definitely see it as a front door hanger as well. I think this has a lot of different uses, and you could go in so many different ways with this if you were going to give this particular project a try. And here's a look at the finished project. I love how this turned out. It's definitely giving spring garden vibes in my opinion. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. First project is this little planter caddy. It's got a variety of uses. We're going to give it an update, and I'm actually going to be doing a workshop on this, so it's almost a little bit like a trial when I do these sorts of projects. My first step is to paint the entire thing with Dixie Belle's Drop Cloth Chalk Mineral Paint. I'm going to paint the entire piece, also the little planter boxes as well. And please excuse my somewhat nasal voice today. My allergies are really acting up, but I really wanted to get this video out for you guys. Remember, you can find a full product list in the description of this video and all of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once my paint was completely dry, I came in with some 220 grit sandpaper to lightly distress the piece back. I want some of that wood showing through. I'm then going to be using some of Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in clear, and I've just got a little bit on my finger and I'm going around the edges where I want to be able to do some wet distressing. This just makes that job a little bit easier. I'm then going to be using Fusion's Vintage Laurel Milk Paint. I'm measuring out a capful of the milk paint, and then I'm measuring out equal parts water and stirring it well. I'm then going to be using a small brush to apply the milk paint. We are going for a layered look here, so I want to be able to see some of that white showing through and also some of that wood. I'm going to be working in sections. I'm going to paint a section, and then I'm going to get my heat gun and I'm going to speed up the drying process to get some of that wonderful crackle that we love. For this piece, I'm only going to be painting the caddy itself. I'm not going to be painting the little planter boxes in this vintage laurel. I really like the idea of a two-toned project, so we're going to have the wonderful green paired with the drop cloth. Once my paint was dry, I used a wet wipe to come in and wipe back in the areas that I knew I'd put the wax. You can see that white starting to peek through. It's really going to give it a wonderfully aged look. It will look like that vintage laurel has worn off and weathered over time, and then the white paint underneath has peeked through, and then some of the wood. And then we're going to move on to the little box planters. I'm going to be using IOD's Antiquities Stamp with these today, and I'm using IOD's permanent black ink. I'm inking up my stamp, and then I'm going to very carefully position it over the top of the box. Now I'm positioning it a little bit higher up because when the boxes actually sit in the little caddy, I want that image to be a bit more visible. I don't want it to be half hidden. So I'm repeating the same process, inking up my stamp and hovering it where I want it to go, and then pressing down. You always want to have one hand holding that stamp in place while the other moves around and applies pressure, and then you want to lift it straight up. When you're stamping, always check that you clean off any excess ink that's gone where you don't want it to go, because it will show up once you apply pressure to your stamp. Next, I want to add a design to the front of our little planter holder there. So I'm inking up part of another stamp from the Antiquities stamp, and then I am wiping off the excess stamp from the areas I don't want. I just want some of that text on the front. All of these pieces will be sealed with easy peasy spray wax. Next, I'm going to be attaching some little feet that I got from Temu. I've used these before, so I will make sure to link them down in the description. They just add a little something special. They really elevate the piece, and I am just going to be screwing these in by hand. The wood that I'm working with is not very hard, so I can do this, and I'm just going to take my time so as to not burr the screws. Before sealing the little planter boxes, I did take some 220 grit sandpaper to lightly distress them back. And here's a look at our French country planter. I love how this turned out. That fusion milk paint can make anything look vintage. Those IOD stamps go beautifully, and those little feet really take this up a notch. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. For the first project, I'm going to be giving this little mini basket case here a makeover. It actually reminds me a little bit of a picnic basket. Now, I really loved the shape, but I wasn't too keen on the orange color or that green stripe. So I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Driftwood mineral paint over the top of the entire piece. Paint Couture's mineral paint has a built-in primer and a built-in top coat, so I'm definitely saving myself a few steps by using this. You could probably use this in a sprayer if you prefer to spray your paint, or you could get a spray can of some kind and paint this. That would probably be the easier option, but I really enjoy painting baskets, so this wasn't too hard at all, and it only really took one and a bit coats. The second coat was just a little touch-up. I'm going to be painting the entire outside of the basket, the bottom of the basket, and I'm also going to be opening it up and painting the inside as well. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Next, when my paint was completely dry, I took out IOD's Lover of Flowers transfer pack, and I'm going to be cutting out this lovely daisy image. I really love the colors on this, and I think it's going to go beautifully with our driftwood. I am going to be taking out some drop cloth scraps that I have. This is just a little rectangle of the fabric, and right here I'm just working out how much I'm going to need to be able to use it with the transfer. I'm just tearing my edges so that they have a vintage frayed look, and then once I'm happy with the size of that, I'm going to peel the backing off the transfer and then position that in the bottom section. I decided I wanted to make the little patch, or whatever you want to call it, a little bit smaller, so we're putting it down the bottom. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to press down. I'm then going to use my transfer stick to go over the top of the entire image. Now, I always have one hand holding that transfer down, especially on fabric, because obviously it can move and I don't want to accidentally slip and then tear my transfer. So I'm making sure it's all down. Then I'm picking a corner, lifting that up and rubbing as I go. And I especially go a little bit slower when I'm doing the transfer on any sort of fabric, because some areas will stick quicker than others. You've got to be really careful of all those little edges and all those little details. It's just best to go slow so that you don't accidentally wreck your transfer. You'll also notice that I cut off the word daisy from down the bottom. I wasn't sure if I was going to use it, but in the end, after I've burnished down the entire design and trimmed it to size, I did decide to grab that little daisy label, and I'm going to be adding that down the bottom underneath our design. I'm going to be attaching our little floral patch to the top of the basket using my hot glue gun. I'm going to be putting little dabs of glue in each of the corners and also at certain points along the sides as well, just so that it's nice and secure. I didn't use any hot glue just in case I decided that I wanted to change over what patch I was using. I would just reheat and reactivate that glue, and I'll be able to swap it over if I want to make a change. Once I have that all completely stuck down, I decided to take out these little thumbtacks. They're a lovely gold color, and I'm just going to press them through the basket. The top section is thick enough that I'm not having any issues with it staying in there, and it's not going to affect anything on the inside. So I'm going to put one in each corner, and I actually really love the gold here because it ties in really nicely with the colors on the daisy transfer. I'd like to mention that I also took the little floral patch outside and I sprayed it with Rust-Oleum's clear matte sealer. And here's our first finished basket. I really love how this turned out, and I think it's a very versatile piece. I could see this being used for seed storage, perhaps as a little sewing box to keep your threads and buttons in. Lots of possibilities. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed this video collection, and you can find the products used in this video on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share this out to a friend that you think might enjoy it.